When you see the violence fighters like Justin Gaethje are capable of, you can't help but wonder why anyone would risk getting in the octagon with them. For perspective, in 30 MMA matches, he's only lost 5 times. Then, 7 matches into his UFC career, and he already donned the title of the most violent man on the planet. But even if he didn't call himself that, the fans would. Before signing with the UFC, he was already 17-0, winning mostly by knockouts and technical knockouts. So, who could tell Gaethje he wasn't the BMF then? We're talking about a man who trolls are afraid to diss. With a win ratio 6 times his losses, who can blame them? He's a BMF, alright. Justin Gaethje grew up in Safford, Arizona as a twin. When he wasn't teaming up with his twin brother, they wrestled and headlocked each other from where they were just toddlers. So it's no surprise that he was drawn to sports at an early age. In fact, at just 4, he was a big wrestling fan. This passion soon turned real as he began wrestling in school. In fact, by his freshman year at Safford High School, he was already skilled enough to throw down his coach in front of the entire team. By junior year, Gaethje was already a dominant force on the team and was voted the most outstanding wrestler at the state tournament. By senior year, he was way out of the league of his opponents regardless of the competition. Although Gaethje had impressive skill sets at this point, he was far from the vicious fighter we know today. His next phase of preparations was signing up at the University of Northern Colorado, where he was coached by Ben Cherington. It was during his time on the college team that the Safford man realized that he could pursue MMA with his wrestling background. That was the first domino to fall. Gaethje's brilliance continued into collegiate wrestling. In 2010, he made the All-American team. For perspective, he was one of the top 8 wrestlers in the whole US in the 157-pound category. With a resume that impressive, it's no wonder Gaethje transitioned into MMA seamlessly and carved out an impressive career. He started fighting professionally in August 2011, debuting against Kevin Croom, who had yet to sign with the UFC at the time. The match was brief and barely lasted a second, with Gaethje putting Croom to sleep in 61 seconds. It was a spectacle that marked the beginning of things to come. Gaethje wasn't just an extraordinarily vicious fighter. He provided great entertainment while at it. So yes, on average, his fights might be short, but those few minutes or seconds might be the best fight you watch all night. For the next 15 months after his victory, Gaethje took down 6 more opponents in consecutive wins. His 6th fight was perhaps the most memorable of his bidding career, as he faced off against UFC veteran Drew Fickett. The match ran for even shorter than his debut bout, with the Safford man sending Fickett to the cleaners in 12 seconds. There was no denying it. Gaethje was destined to be a star. 2 years, 7 back-to-back wins, and 0 losses later since turning pro. The World Series of Fighting, now the Professional Fighters League, offered him a contract in 2013. Gaethje put pen to paper and continued on his destructive spree without missing a beat. Jayce Cavalcante, the Dream and Strikeforce veteran, was one of his earliest victims, facing in his debut for the PFL. Gaethje's next 2 matches were also victories ended via stoppage. Then came the match against Robert Patenschnock for a chance at the WSOF lightweight title. Gaethje finished the match in the first round through a stoppage victory to land himself the much coveted title. Gaethje would go on to be one of the most dominant title holders, defending his belt 5 successful times and holding onto it for 3 years. Not only did this stretch of dominance show the highlight as a reliable figure in the industry, but it also showed just how brutal he could be when it mattered. In 2015, for instance, Gaethje went up against Luis Palomino twice. It was a wild rivalry that spanned a year and provided 5 rounds of non-stop action. Oh, and Gaethje won both times, first in March and then in September. Palomino stood no chance. 2 years later, in 2017, Gaethje's record sat at an impressive 17-0. Plus, he always had the most entertaining matches, so it made no sense that he wasn't yet in the biggest MMA promotion company. UFC fans were demanding to see him in the Octagon. Dana White heard, and he answered. Gaethje was signed and immediately pushed into the elite lightweight category and given a main event spot against Michael Johnson. The fight was no different from what MMA fans had come to expect of Gaethje at this point. It was an all-out gory action that left both men badly hurt. But a bloody canvas never stopped the highlight before, and it certainly didn't start then. Gaethje went on to win by stoppage late into the second round to bring an end to a match widely considered to be the best MMA event of 2017. Unfortunately, the highlights luck would run thin for his next two UFC matches against Dustin Poirier and Eddie Alvarez when he succumbed to 2 defeats. Yet, these defeats weren't total fumblings. In fact, in both cases, he bagged the Fight of the Night prize, and both events ranked in the charts for Fight of the Year contenders. Even better, Gaethje's slump only lasted 4 months after his last defeat to the Diamond, and he was back to winning ways. His next victim was James Vick, who was done dirty by being drawn with an ego-bruised maniac. Gaethje ended the match in 87 seconds via knockout. Fast forward 7 months later, the Safford man was drawn against elite lightweight Edson Barboza. Despite his opponent's prowess in the division, Gaethje only needed 2.5 minutes to close the game. Another fight later, and he was within a shout of the lightweight title, with Tony Ferguson standing in the way. If you remember anything from our video about Ferguson, you remember that he was nearly impossible to beat in his prime. So this match proved to be the biggest, baddest fight of Gaethje's career. For one, Ferguson was on a 12-match winning streak, so for 24 minutes, he went at the veteran fighter with everything he got. Ferguson held his own well and only succumbed to Gaethje's punishments in the 5th round. It was clear as day from the uproar among the crowd. The highlight was the untitled BMF who had just put down another untitled BMF, and he was now gunning for a Khabib's title. Gaethje was him. 7 years into his UFC career, Justin Gaethje has become the only fighter in UFC history to have scored at least 1 performance bonus in each of his first 6 fights. To quote the man himself, he's made more in bonuses than most fighters on the roster make from matches. Barring his losses, it's almost guaranteed that Gaethje leaves every UFC event with a bonus. What makes Gaethje such an incredible fighter is how he appeals to both the brass and the fans. Regardless of your thoughts on the man, you can't help but be entertained when he's in the octagon. Every match with him is as high octane as they come. In fact, fighters debuting on the same card as a Gaethje match know better than to expect fair odds of walking home with an extra 50k bonus. Besides his already impressive records, the highlight also has a fascinating skill set that is also terrifying. Of the top fighters in the UFC who absorb the least strikes per minute, the bulk of them have wrestling backgrounds. We have standout names like Khabib, who endured 1.64 strikes per minute. Then there's Tatiana Suarez with 1.45 strikes per minute, and Islam Makhachev absorbing 0.76 strikes per minute. You'd think that a fighter with Gaethje's wrestling upbringing would have an even better record, but he's nowhere near the top. Gaethje absorbs an eye-watering 9.67 strikes per minute while still defending 54% of strikes. It's almost like he's not trying at all, only that's not true. Instead, it takes a real BMF to take and take and take without breaking before going on to win the match. In fact, to level the playing field, it's not the worst suggestion to allow Gaethje's opponents to step into the octagon with small weapons. Perhaps a cinder block shrunk down with pin particles and hidden in the fist. That ought to do the trick, no? If you need further proof, you need only rewatch his fight against the now retired Donald Cerrone. The bout was shaping up to be the most violent matchup in recent UFC history. However, for Gaethje, it was just another Tuesday. For 2 minutes and 30 seconds, Cowboy Cerrone gave and gave and gave his best strikes. But like a father going for milk, there was just no stopping Gaethje. Without missing a beat, he parted the Cowboy from his consciousness in the first round, his 9th successful first round stoppage at the time. Even when he lost, Gaethje still made for a formidable opponent and put on a great show for fans. In the first defeat of his MMA career against Eddie Alvarez in 2017, Gaethje's fighting style made him such an impressive foe to topple that night became arguably Alvarez's most exciting victory. And that's saying something considering the kind of prolific career the latter has had. In fact, to take down the highlight, who was notoriously allergic to being knocked out, Alvarez had to pull out all the stops with a series of fight-ending blows and what might just be one of the best knee strikes of all time. All in all, what makes Justin Gaethje a recipe for disaster in the Octagon is his intimidating record and how he's managed to claw that many victories with little to no ground game. We have a wrestler with little wins by submission, a few by decision, and the majority by knocking the lights out of opponents. It doesn't help that he has the durability of a cartoon character and the devastating strikes of an anime main character. How do you stop a man who has won by punch, slam, leg kick, elbows, doctor stoppage, and more? The highlight isn't just a name, but a promise. To the UFC faithful, Gaethje creates memories that forever play in their heads. For opponents, it's much different, because it's their lives flashing through their eyes. If it can be done, Gaethje already did, perhaps even better than most.